Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I yield for a moment to my friend from Idaho for the purpose of recognition?
Sure. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just want to take the opportunity to recognize the chairman of the Nez Perce tribe that is here, Sam Penny, that's visiting us today and doing some other things, but I'd like to welcome you to the committee. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me begin by thanking you for coming back. I appreciate it very much. I know how busy you are, and I appreciate you giving us some additional time. Second, I just want to thank you and the President. I appreciate very much the increases in the budget as it relates to Indian country, particularly in education, particularly in law enforcement. They were very badly needed, and I appreciate your leadership, Mr. Secretary, in that regard. I've got two areas of questions I want to go. A couple relate to Indian country, a couple to energy. On Indian country, you had the unfortunate experience as soon as you walked in, not untypical, of finding yourself embroiled in a lawsuit, the Carcieri lawsuit, which, as I know members of this committee will know, basically the Supreme Court decided that tribes that were not listed in the 1934 Indian Reorganization Act were not subject to the department moving land into trust, and it's caused, as you can imagine, and as you know, a great deal of consternation across Indian country, particularly for tribes that were recognized by Congress after 1934. So I'm curious as to what sort of legislative fix, and I think there's a great deal of bipartisan sympathy to do that. The administration's going to propose something, and sort of where you are in your thinking, because otherwise we're not sure how much, but we've got a considerable amount of economic activity for newer tribes, or tribes that were recognized more recently is actually a better way to put it, that's at risk.
Thank you very much, Congressman Cole. And Mr. Chairman, again, my apologies for the interruption here and my having to run over to the Senate. Congressman Cole, the Carcieri decision is one of great import to this nation and to the Native American tribes, as well as to the Department of Interior and all of us who have, all of you who have reservations and Native American communities in your areas. We are keenly aware of the complexity and difficulty of this issue and have engaged in a consultation with the tribal communities to see how we might be able to bring about a legislative resolution that makes sense. We need to deal with the tribal issues for those tribes recognized between 1934 and this time, and then we also need to develop a process going forward. And it is not going to be an easy undertaking, but we will keep you in the committee up to date as we move forward with it.
Well, please do. I would certainly like to work with you on finding a satisfactory resolution to that issue. It doesn't affect any of my tribes directly, but it certainly affects a great number of people. Second, this is just to make a request. This committee received testimony when we talked about law enforcement issues in Indian country that to the effect that a lot of our tribes that are poor and are technically eligible for Department of Justice grants of all sorts, matching grants, simply don't have the funds to do the match. It's a considerable problem. Some tribes, again, are fairly successful, and I would hope that you could engage in some sort of discussion with your counterpart at the Department of Justice, with maybe Attorney General Holder, and see if we can find some way, because Congress has amended a lot of legislation in recent years to allow tribal governments to apply for the same sorts of grants that our localities and our states get in the law enforcement area, but obviously they don't have a taxing base. They have no ability to tax, and they can't use federal funds to match other federal funds. They're really very constrained. So there ought to be some way to either hold them harmless or do something, because we certainly have had cases where people need to construct detention facilities on reservations, need equipment, and simply can't come up with the money for the match, and so they don't qualify, and it ends up going someplace else. So anything you could do in that regard would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Congressman Cole, and I think it is a very important issue, and it's one of coordination among sister agencies in the federal government. it is an issue that as soon as I have my people on board and we get the people in the Department of Justice on board, we will take a hard look at that issue and make whatever changes we need to make the granting program more effective and accessible to tribes as the ones you were describing.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Let me move quickly now to energy, if I may, because I do have some concerns, and I don't think you dealt with this in your written testimony, although you may, and I may have missed it, but I was going through the budget area, and there's a discussion on, I think, page 20 of the document that we got about levying a tax on certain offshore oil and gas production. This, I take it, is not the fees we were talking about. That is not the, I want to get to that in a minute, but I'm curious as to what this tax would be. It's not specified. It's sort of, the language says, in the interest of advancing important policy objectives such as providing more level playing field among producers, raising return to the taxpayer, encourage sustainable oil and gas production. The administration is developing a proposal to impose an excise tax on certain oil and gas produced offshore in the future. The administration looks forward to working with Congress. I'm just curious where we're at in that process. What kind of a tax is it? How much is it? It sort of implies it would only apply to certain producers, so I'm curious as to who it would apply to and who it wouldn't.
Congressman Cole, the specific issue that you raise has to do with certain leases issued in the Gulf during a period in the late 90s, and those leases have been the subject of litigation. We have two ways of resolving the issue. One is to pursue the legal remedies, which ultimately here is a pending appeal to the United States Supreme Court. And the other alternative is to try to figure out some legislative fix to address that particular issue. And so we are working with OMB and obviously work with Congress as we figure out how exactly we will move forward on the issue.
Okay, I know the issue you're talking about now. Along the same area, there's discussion by the administration for eliminating some of the tax deductions that frankly make domestic production possible, intangible drilling cost deductions, depletion allowance, those sorts of things. If those were removed, do you have any study underway as to what that would do on the public lands in terms of decreasing exploration and production? Because I can assure you, if those go away, you're going to see a very marked decline in domestic exploration and production there. Contrary to some of the things in your document, we're not a very cheap place to produce oil and gas. We're a pretty expensive, producer because our fields are reasonably mature and a lot of the best sites have already been used. So it's, I think that tax incentive is important to the domestic industry, and I think my opinion would be it would impact the number of people seeking permits to drill on public land as well. Do you have any reaction to that or any study underway?
I do have a reaction, Congressman Cole, and that is that we need to make sure that we are getting a fair return back to the American citizen. We are, as citizens, the owners of these public resources. There is, as you know, in this committee, recent GAO studies that indicate that, frankly, the American citizen and taxpayer is not getting a fair return back. And so the issue you raise is one of those issues that falls within that range of discussion that we will be having conversations with you.
When we had the discussion with GAO about that and they appeared before this committee, I asked, and I don't think their comparison, I would just ask you to do the same thing as you look forward, because I agree with you, getting a fair return is the appropriate thing and that ought to be at the top of the administration's list of things to do. But they looked at what we got in comparison to other countries. I would just suggest you ought to look at private leases in the area to see whether or not the government's really not getting the same return. Again, there are other places in the world that are much more lucrative to drill because the fines are potentially much larger than in the United States. So the real question is whether or not the returns the taxpayer are getting are out of line with what a private domestic person who was giving an oil and gas lease would give. And I don't think the GAO report actually dealt with that. It really just compared what you might get if you were drilling in a foreign country, which again might or might not be a much cheaper place to explore and produce.
Okay. Mr. Price.
Thank you, Mr.
for
Chairman.
being so patient, and we're all patient today.
Yes, indeed. I want to add my word of greetings to the Secretary, and thank you for taking this on and for your good work thus far.
Mr. Price is the chairman of the Homeland Security Appropriations Subcommittee, so even though he's a very junior member of this committee, he is a cardinal up here, so very important person.
Thank you, Congressman.
Well, thank you. I wasn't expecting that, but I am, as a matter of fact,
I sent my list over, by the way.
as a matter of fact, I am a new member of this subcommittee, and I'm very glad to be on this subcommittee. But as my question may reveal, I'm asking some fairly basic questions about some of our policy challenges here, and in doing that, I'm actually following up mainly on Mr. Simpson's earlier questions about Outer Continental Shelf leasing and related matters. So let me ask you a couple of questions, again, by way of elaboration. This matter of the proposed fee on non-producing leases, of course, this links back, as you recognize, to the debate we had in the House last year on use it or lose it, and the broader debate on Outer Continental Shelf exploration. I wonder if you could tell us how you define non-producing leases. What is the working definition of that? And what do you envision the ultimate disposition of these leases to be? Is there a certain point at which a non-producing lease should be sold back, or would the owner indefinitely continue to pay a fee, or just how's this going to work? I'd appreciate your filling that out. Secondly, this pending 5-year proposal, as I understand it, could allow offshore drilling as close as 3 miles to the shore, including, as you well know, areas that have been under moratorium recently, and for as many as 30 years. That certainly applies to North Carolina coastal waters off of the Outer Banks and other areas. We passed some compromise legislation in the House that allowed for drilling between 50 and 100 miles offshore, and permitted the states to have a decisive role in making that decision. So here too, I have a question about what you're envisioning as you revisit this 5-year plan and formulate your own position. I'm sure you're getting an avalanche of comments as we speak. What do you regard as the appropriate limit on close-in drilling, and the role of the states in determining what should be permitted?
Thank you very much, Congressman Price. Those are very important and very timely questions. With respect to your first question on the fee for non-producing leases, the proposal is that we put in a $4 per acre fee on these non-producing leases. As I indicated earlier in my testimony, that is still to be defined. We do not have yet a specific proposal on that relative to what it means to be a non-producing lease and for how long. And I think, as Chairman Dix and others on the committee pointed out earlier, that because you get a lease today doesn't mean that you're going to be in production tomorrow or in the next year, and it may actually take you multiple years to get there. So that reality has to be factored in as we make the decision, and we'll work closely with this committee as we move forward on that. With respect to your second question concerning the Outer Continental Shelf and the 5-year plan, I want to just really, when we think about the OCS in today's world, we need to look at it in the context of 2 5-year plans. There is a current 5-year plan that's in place, which is a 2007 through 2012 plan. That is a plan that essentially has been thrown out by the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, and we are in the process of getting clarification from the court about what we do with respect to that plan and all of those leases, some 2,000 leases in the Gulf and also in Alaska, that were essentially functioning under the mandate of that 5-year plan. So there's a question mark there with the existing plan as it exists today. Secondly, with respect to the new 5-year plan that the prior administration proposed in the late hour of its existence, that particular plan is one in which I have extended the comment period through September the 20th. And I did so because I did not feel that something that was as major as a new plan for the Outer Continental Shelf should only receive 60 days of comment and input from the Congress. And that's essentially what ended up happening with that rollout at the end of the last administration. So I extended the comment period, and we're in the process of holding hearings, receiving comments, and obviously the point of view of the members of Congress is very important to us as we move forward with what will be a new 5-year plan for the OCS. In terms of what's appropriate relative to the creation of buffer zones in certain areas, 50 miles, 100 miles, we haven't gotten yet to the point where we have, where I have, or the President has at least a proposal to move forward with, and it's something that we will work with in the coming months.
Well, I commend you for reopening that comment period. I would agree that this is a matter of great significance, and as I said earlier, I expect you're not having any absence of comments. I would imagine they're coming in at a pretty good clip, and you'll have plenty to think about. This issue of the state's role, though, is a vexing one, I think, and I assume there'll be a good deal of grist for the mill in that regard as well. We certainly take it seriously in North Carolina, although we don't have perfect agreement ourselves as to what extent the state should be interjected into some kind of approval process. We tend to think that a state role, though, in a state like ours, a state role is appropriate given the particular interest we have and the fact that these are waters that are treacherous and of particular environmental sensitivity. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I have just a couple things I wanted to go through. I'll try to do it quickly. We have been concerned on climate change that, and we have our wildlife center at the USGS, and you've done some very good initiatives on climate change in your budget, which we appreciate. What we're concerned about is if we have a cap and trade bill, we'd like to, at least I'm just talking personally now, I'd like to see at least 5% of, if there are revenues that are generated by that, devoted to the protection of wildlife and to help fund the agencies. Now, this is under consideration by the committee up here. They're looking at this. Mr. Dingell has been a major advocate of this. I'm an advocate of this. I just, I've talked to Nancy Sutley about this at CEQ in the sense of trying to find out kind of where the administration is on this. Do you have any idea where the administration stands on this, or do you need time to look at this? Or I don't want to, if there isn't a position taken on this, I think it's something that should be considered.
Chairman Dix,
and this would be for your agencies.
You are looking at something that I think has great possibility and great hope, and frankly, I think that when you look at the amount of money that we need to invest in our land and water conservation and all the initiatives which this committee has so much supported, I think when one of the ways of getting there is to look at what we've done in the past and what the needs are, whether it be at the Great Lakes or Puget Sound or the Bay Delta or the coastal wetlands of Louisiana, or you can keep going on, the whole landscapes of America. And I frankly think that we need to figure out ways of getting revenue into that agenda, and an appropriate source would be revenue that ultimately comes from cap and trade.
All right. Another concern, you and I have had a few discussions about the Endangered Species Act. One of the things that, there's been 30 years of listing species, or subspecies, or vertebrate population, whenever it occurs, once it is determined to be threatened and endangered, either in the entirety of its range or in a significant portion of its range. Now, there was a 2007 opinion made by the previous administration that basically said that a species that is threatened or endangered may be protected in only some of the places it occurs. And some of us who have been advocates of protecting the Endangered Species Act are concerned about that decision and what the impact might be on previous decisions. And I don't know, I've talked to Tom Strickland about this, but have you had a chance to think about that issue? As an attorney general, you and a former head of the DNR in your state, you've had a lot of experience on this. Or would you like to take that one for the record?
Let me take it for the record, but only comment in this regard that we have seen examples of the Endangered Species Act work in great ways through the Whooping Crane Recovery Program of multiple states and a whole host of other things. And if there are ways in which we can improve the functioning of the Act, either through legislative changes, we will work with you, as well as whether we can improve it through the administrative authorities, which we currently have.
And, you know, the one thing I just mentioned on renewables, I'm for renewables, but they don't all have to be done on public lands. I would hope we'd look at private lands as well. You know, as you know, being the senator from and Attorney General of Colorado, there was, under the previous administration, kind of a stampede to get these energy projects out there. And we don't want to see the same thing happen with renewables, that we don't take into account the environmental issues. And I'm for all these renewables, solar, wind. You know, I'm a little more nervous about offshore issues because I don't think we've really looked at that. And one other thing I just wanted to mention to you on sequestration. Dr. Mark Myers, who was the former head of U.S. Geological Survey, in his testimony a couple years ago, pointed out that we have not done a lot of science on carbon sequestration in, you know, areas other than in former oil and gas fields. We know a little bit about that, but in just going out somewhere in, let's say, eastern Washington State or in Colorado and just putting this into the ground, we're not, you know, there's not been a lot of science done on this. And there's some money in your budget to do science on this. I think this is imperative that we get this right. And I know there was a big flap in Illinois about a project up there that got canceled. But I think trying to find answers to these things from both a geologic and a biological perspective are very important. I just wonder if you had any comment on that.
I fully agree.
Okay. Mr. Simpson, try to make this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's money in your budget to study sequestration?
Yes, there is.
Are you coordinating with the
$7 million.
Department of Energy on that? Because I know the Department of Energy is also looking, and we fund substantially sequestration studies in the Department of Energy. Are you working cross-department with them?
Yes, very closely.
Okay. Just a couple of other things. One of them is a statement I just wanted to say, and I'm sorry that Mr. Price left, but it had to do relative to the states that want to have control, really, or veto power, I guess, over offshore drilling outside their coast and really outside of lands or in waters that are United States waters, not state waters. And they want to have.
I think that was the Peterson
Amendment.
Yeah,
they want to have. It was part of the deal to get it through. But I find it surprising sometimes when these states want to have the state to have a say in all this and be able to veto that or whatever, and yet when it deals with public lands inside a state, whether it's going to be wilderness or something like that, state doesn't matter. So there's a little bit of duplicity in all of this. We got to have the state's input and all that versus when we try to do it out in the West in some of the wilderness things. We've got proposals from people who live nowhere near Idaho to make Idaho, I don't know, it's 9 million acres of Idaho wilderness, and they don't live anywhere near Idaho. And their argument is always, these are all public lands owned by all of us. They're right. But the people that are going to protect these lands are the people that live there. Just a statement. A couple other questions. Any chance of the administration looking again at a moratorium on OCS?
Yeah, we are going through a very thoughtful process, Congressman Simpson, concerning the OCS. And we're looking at a number of different things, including where we need additional information, where we don't have any information. For example, in the Atlantic, the last seismic work that was done there was some 30 years ago. So we're taking a comprehensive approach in assembling information and data and input, but do not at this point have a plan, whether it's moratorium or not moratorium, or defining areas where it's going to be appropriate to drill.
Okay. Is the department going to be looking at a rewrite of the 1872 mining law?
Yes.
Have you got an outline for that yet? Do you know what you'll be proposing? We've had laws that have a proposal passed Congress last year that was, in my view, a little extreme, but I'm one who believes that the 1872 mining law needs to be updated, obviously since 1872. But the one that passed the House, as I said, was a little extreme and obviously was not going to go anywhere in the Senate. We need a common sense proposal to updating this mining law.
I agree with you, Congressman Simpson, that we need to move forward and reform the 1872 mining law. And there are many areas, frankly, of agreement already between
Right.
the mining world and the environmental world. And there may be a way in which we can craft legislation that will be acceptable. It is a priority of mine. It is not something, frankly, that I am going to be able to get to in terms of the substance and negotiation and working with you and other members of the Congress until I am able to get some people on board to help
Right.
me work on these issues.
I appreciate that. One last statement, or comment, or question. I guess this might be for our chairman. We always talk about previous administrations. It seems like we always talk about previous administrations. Earlier this year, President Bush took steps to preserve 190,000 square miles across U.S. territories in the South Pacific. 2 years ago, he did the same thing with another 138,000 square miles north of Hawaii. Taken together, this amounts to an area more than twice the size of the state of California. The areas saved by President Bush are natural aquariums teeming with coral reefs, migrating sharks, and tuna. And on the small protected islands are the roosts of millions of seabirds. In these two actions, President Bush preserved more square miles from development than any previous president in history. There is
And we
much,
congratulate him.
and much of that is, well, I just wanted to get it on the record. And now the question, much of the management of this is under Fish and Wildlife Service. There's nothing in your budget, as I understand it, for the increased management that's going to be necessary there.
And also, there's a ship that sank there that really desperately needs to be removed.
Right.
So we got to figure out a way to solve that problem. I commend the gentleman for mentioning this, because it is one of the major accomplishments.
I will look into the issue, Congressman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And then I'm going to go to Mr. Holbrook just quickly. I know you. We had a hearing with Amnesty International on sexual violence against American Indian and Alaska Native women. And it said there are violations of our human rights on many levels and are but one example of the significant disparities that exist for American Indian and Alaska Native people in assessing health services and justice in the United States. The vast majority of these crimes will go unpunished. And then the U.S. Department of Justice's own statistics, and I think you kind of mentioned this in your statement, indicate that Native American, Alaska Native women are more than 2.5 times more likely than women in the United States in general to be raped or sexually assaulted. The agencies responsible for responding to this violence are severely underfunded, and their services are far from adequate to ensure that the required law enforcement and medical attentions are supplied. And this was very, I know Mr. Olber was very concerned about this. All the members of the committee were very concerned about this. And the other problem we find is, and this is, former Attorney General, you'll be very sensitive to this. Most of the people who commit these crimes are non-Indians who come onto the reservation, commit this act, and then there's no way you can't. The Indian police officers have no jurisdiction over non-Indians under a case that actually was out in my state, somebody versus Suquamish. And if there's a criminal conviction, let's say in I think it's a federal court, it's only for or if it's in a tribal court, it's only for 1 year, a 1-year penalty for some of these very heinous crimes. And I know you got a lot on your plate, but I think this is one where we have to we also, they did a major exercise out in, I think, South Dakota, where they brought in adequate law enforcement on the reservation, and the level of crime dropped dramatically. So we know that if we do have the law enforcement personnel there, that they can get this under control. But this is out of control. This is not right, and you're just starting out. I hope you'll put this on your agenda of things. It's called Operation Dakota Peacekeeper, which I'll give you a copy with when we're done here. But I hope you'll take this on as a concern with and you're going to have people, I think, with BIA that will have great experience too. So, we'll have some good people to work with. We want to help you on this.
I think it's an American tragedy. It needs to be addressed. It will be very high on my priority, and I will work in partnership with the United States Department of Justice as well as with other law enforcement to get the job done.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to commend you for your comments about the major omnibus bill, the land bill. That's a bill that had probably 100 different items in it. Fish and Wildlife Service, national parks, trails, scenic trails, a geological trail, historic trails, so on and so forth. I'm wondering how you managed to find enough funding to handle and start all those different things that are going to be going on in those areas. I was particularly interested that there was the Trail of Tears National Historic Trail, which now joins the Chief Joseph Trail in the Northwest in Idaho and Oregon and so on. It's always seemed to me that there were some other ones that ought to be similarly recognized, like the long walk from Bosque Redondo back to Canyon de Chelly in Arizona, or the route of the Northern Cheyenne tribe from Indian country up to Montana. A very amazing thing in the late 1880s. There are probably others as well, but those are the ones that quickly come to my mind that ought to be considered. But I'm sort of wondering how you manage to, whether the budget is adequate to dealing with all these new responsibilities that the major units of the Interior Department are going to have to deal with.
Congressman Oliver, the answer is no, it is not. And that is because the so-called omnibus lands bill, I wish it had another name because it is such a milestone in our treasured landscapes agenda that we all believe in so much. And I think omnibus doesn't quite get it. But it is a major bill. But as you well know, it is an authorization bill. And so ultimately, we will have to find ways of funding it. It was passed and signed by the President after our 2010 budget was put together. And so that's why I think, with the exception of 2 Indian water rights settlements, those budgetary needs are not reflected in the 2010 budget at this point.
So we'll have to reflect it in the 2011 budget, those things that are ready to move forward.
Yes.
Okay.
Unless you can find another way of doing it.
Can you give me an idea? Are you in the business of trying to reorganize the offices of the Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Park Service? There are, I don't have any sense of what the map looks like as to where the major administrative offices are, but those are the 2 largest units of the Department of Interior, with pieces all over the country, each of them with pieces all over the country. BLM is more Western, Indian BIA is spottily placed and so forth, not very many units in the eastern part. What I'm getting at is that there appears to be a move to close a Boston dear to my heart, an office dear to my heart, namely the Boston offices of the Park Service, to reduce its significance or close it, something along that line. I'm wondering if this is a general program that you have before the department to consider those kinds of reorganizations in Fish and Wildlife Service and Park Service.
3 points, Congressman Oliver. First, I am not aware of any position or movement to close any office in the Boston area. 2, I don't have anything specific with respect to national parks and fish and wildlife in terms of reorganization. 3, I do think that it is important for us, especially at the beginning of this administration, to take a hard look at how we're organized and to see whether or not there are ways in which we can improve our work. I will tell you one that is very much on my mind, and we have some ideas but have not yet formulated any proposal, is how we deal with MMS and BLM on that side of the ledger. On the national park side and fish and wildlife side and Bureau of Reclamation side, we have regional offices with different regions. You know, I ask myself a question, which I think all of us probably ask ourselves from time to time. Why do we have different regions? Are we organized in the right way? Would it make more sense to be organized along major watersheds? Are there different ways in which we can do that? And I think it's important at the beginning of an administration to really take a hard look at those issues, and I will be doing that once we have our full management team in place.
All right, I think that we're going to call it a morning thing. Mr. Secretary, you were very impressive, did a great job, answered all of our questions. And we look forward to working with you on all these important issues, and just keep Pam there because she's our
Don't steal her
life
from
and
me.
blood. You know, we're not going to do that. I'll tell you that. Over my dead body. Okay, she stays right with you. Anyway, thank you very much, and I'm glad you went over and defended your appointee too. I'm glad you had a chance to do that.
Thank you very much, Jim.
And I want you to know,
It would have actually been back quicker, Mr. Chairman, but your brother was in the chair.
he was in the chair. So we were beating up on him. We got to get back. We got to get back. Anyway, I'm sure he'll talk to you about that. Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.